We got NFL news and notes. Johnny Mack is in, and he joins us now on 97.3 ESPN. John, welcome back, pal. How are you?
I'm good, guys. I'll give you real quick. I'll give you a big Mitchell Trubisky fan. Ryan Pace, the biggest in the world.
He's the biggest in the land. Yes, he was, and his job will probably be hinging on how that works out. But I guess he bought himself with some time for that one, huh?
Yeah, maybe not actually, because the Bears are coming off their worst 16-game season in franchise history, and obviously in that division, when you consider you have two playoff teams, Green Bay, Detroit, you have another, Minnesota, that's a caliber talented, probably would have been a playoff team if Teddy Bridgewater didn't get hurt last season. They're not going to be good again this year. I don't think John Fox is going to last past this season, and hey, they might fire the general manager as well. So you would think you bought a little bit of time, but not necessarily.
That's interesting to see what happens because Chicago. Now, you talk about, I always say I don't think there's rebuilding for much of the NFL. There's a handful of teams. The Bears are a rebuilder. They haven't been good for a long time now. When you miss the playoffs, like 5, 6, 7, when you start to get a string like that, Buffalo, Cleveland, formerly Oakland, now Chicago, there are teams that are in the constant rebuild. When you can't get to the playoffs, getting to the NFL playoffs is like the NHL. Like, you're always there at least once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up Buffalo specifically. I mean, they haven't been in the playoffs in the 21st century. So that's really been difficult for them. But, yeah, you usually have a spike, and that's the thing we always talk about. You can have a season where everything goes correctly, you stay healthy. So much of the NFL is a war of attrition. And if you are healthy for a particular year, there's not really a great talent disparity between teams. You could go up and win 9 or 10 games.
Right.
But the ones that are consistent from year to year to year, starting with the Patriots, obviously, Green Bay, Pittsburgh, teams like that, starts with the quarterback, let's be honest.
We're talking with John McMullen. Give us the lowdown on Marcus Smith and what that means. When we hear all these fifth-year option guys, there's been a lot of them around the NFL. What does it mean that the Eagles will pass on his option?
Yeah, under the new CBA, which came into effect in 2011, all first-round picks signed 4-year deals, and they have a fifth-year team option that you can pick up or not. And that generally, I always say, is we always talk about draft grades and obviously how meaningless they are. The only ones that matter are the fifth-year options, because generally, if you don't pick up that fifth-year option, you're admitting you made a mistake on a first-round pick. There are exceptions. Bridgewater, I just mentioned, in that same class, the Vikings didn't pick up his option, but the reasons for that are obvious. They would have, but he may never play again, so they can't guarantee that kind of salary. So for the most part, the guys who don't get their options picked up are because they've been failures. And Marcus Smith has been a failure, and the Eagles aren't picking up his fifth-year option. Hardly a surprise.
John McMullen with us. John, the Eagles are one of the bigger spenders in the undrafted free agent market. Are there guys that you think have a chance to stick around, these UFAs that are going to make the Eagles roster?
Yeah, I mean, there's always generally a few. Last year it was 4. But, you really don't want 4 undrafted free agents making your team, because that's an indication you didn't have a very deep roster to begin with. And, the less undrafted free agents that make your team, probably the better, to be honest, because that means you do have some depth. But, guys will have a chance to make the practice squad and maybe get noticed in that way and sort of build up. If you look at the 4 guys from last season that spent some time on the roster, guys like Destiny Vallejo, C.J. Smith, Byron Marshall. Obviously, they're not going to be big, impactful players on the team, at least right away. The hope is they develop into something down the line.
Hey, John, I want to get your take on – I know we talked a little bit about the wide receivers, but I'm counting at least 5 that are going to be on the team, and that leaves – I know we discussed this a little bit yesterday, but do the Eagles keep 6 wideouts? I mean, is that something that might be a decision for them? Because if not, that means that you're cutting Aguilar, and we know that's an expensive cut. So do you see them keeping 6 wide receivers? Because as I'm looking at it, I see – Aguilar, Green Beckham, Torrey Smith, Alshon Jeffrey, the 2 rookies that just got picked, plus Bryce Treggs and Paul Turner. So how does that mix end up there? Because it seems that somebody's got to get at least two guys that were on the team last year that played prominent roles are going to be gone.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, generally you keep 5 or 6, and more likely 5. Although, because as the roster is set up currently, it's probably more likely to be 6. Obviously, the guys who are going to make the team unquestionably are Alshon Jeffrey, Torrey Smith, Jordan Matthews, and the 2 rookies. And then you start talking from there, and it's usually if you're going to be a 5th or 6th receiver, you have to help on special teams. So we'll see how it shakes out. The one thing, though, you don't know, and what tends to make those decisions perhaps easier when it comes down to it is injuries. You never know who's going to get hurt, and that might open up something for somebody else.
Do you think Aguilar would get, flat out cut if he's just not good enough and he's not going to play much, or do you think no matter what he makes the team?
I would say right now he's probably going to make the team simply for the salary cap.
Which means they would be keeping 6 guys.
Yeah.
Unless they pulled off a very big surprise like they did last year. Everybody thought Randall was going to make the team just because they signed him. But they wouldn't cut Torrey Smith, right? He would be the one guy that you would say, maybe, but they're not cutting Torrey Smith, right?
They could. If he comes in to training camp, remember he's coming off a really, really bad season.
Right, and Gibson just outshines him.
Exactly. The contract is not at the point similar to, as you brought up with Randall. They could cut him, and it wouldn't hurt him that much. So that is a slight possibility if he just, as I said, if he comes in August and is just completely outplayed by not only the rookies, but even a Nelson Aguilar. They could move on from Torrey Smith very, very easily.
That's an interesting.
But that's not the plan.
No, I would agree with you that that's not the plan. Like you see, Alshon, Jordan Matthews, Torrey Smith getting the most snaps.
Yeah, that would be the 3 in the typical Eagles base offense, which is 11 personnel, which is 3 receivers on the field. Those would be the 3 guys that would get the majority of the repetitions. And you hope that the rookies start to mix in at some point. And generally, just by the nature of the position, you hope you don't have any serious injuries. But, at some point during the season, you're going to have dings, whether it's hamstrings or ankles, and the other guys are going to have to play at some point. So they'll start to mix in, but there's no question as it's drawn up, the 3 guys that they want to count on are Jeffrey, Smith, and Jordan Matthews.
Do you think Hollins and Gibson are a part of the offense in year 1, or more just focused on special teams with those 2?
Well, I think Gibson has a better chance for the reason we just said, in the fact that they need a deep threat, and if Torrey doesn't perform, if he's similar to what he was in San Francisco, I think Gibson would have an opportunity because of his deep speed to get on the field. Hollins, it's more likely that'll start out on special teams, and they'll mix him in. He's a very good special teams player. Howie said they think of him as a receiver first, though, and they want him to get into the offense eventually, but I think it'll be more slow going for him.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, of course, covers the Eagles for our website and covers the league nationally, FanRag Sports NFL at JF McMullen on Twitter. And the wide receivers, I think, will be very interesting. And then we transition into another spot would be running back, and that's Pumphrey's, where same question, because I don't know, looking at Pumphrey's, the back of his bubblegum card there, I don't see a lot of return history in his game there.
No, I think, I don't think the Eagles are bringing him in as a return guy right now. Obviously, you have Darren Sproles on punts, and we'll see how kickoffs shake out. But I don't think he would be involved on that aspect of it. I think he's more of a longer-term pick and to be the eventual replacement for Darren Sproles when he retires as a third down back. I think, it's a later round pick. You have to realize, despite the fact that, and I love them all, I love all the draftniks, they think everybody's a great player, but the reality of the NFL is it's difficult to excel as a rookie. And if you start going to the fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh round, you're not expecting those guys to play. And if they are playing, you probably have some issues. So I think with Pumphrey, it's a pick for down the line, and they want to get him into their program and develop him, and hopefully he becomes this team's third down back once 2018 rolls around.
John McMullen with us. John, do you worry about Pumphrey's durability? Because I saw you talk about the draftniks and the people that like to make, and there was a lot of this comparison between Pumphrey and Darren Sproles. But the fact of the matter is that Pumphrey's a little bit smaller, certainly lighter. And then if you look at what he did at the combine, he could only manage 2 reps, right, on the bench?
I think it was 5, but it was the worst of all 27 backs who lifted. I think you and I could get up to 25 times, Pete, so that's not good. I mean, he's not look, the comparison to Darren Sproles to me is a silly one, because if you look at Darren Sproles' lower body, it is just jacked beyond belief. And if you look at Mike Pumphrey's lower body, it's rail thin. And so to me, there's a big difference. There's a lot of work to be done. I compare it a little bit to Alex McAllister, who was a 7th-round pick last year, and the Eagles thought could develop into a decent pass rusher at defensive end. But the guy weighed 240 pounds. So the plan was to get him into the system, get him in the weight room, put some weight on him, and see if he could develop into an NFL player down the line. I think it's going to be some of the same with Mike Pumphrey, because right now he's just not strong enough to be an NFL player.
If the talk was going into the draft that the Eagles had to get more weapons for Carson Wentz, or going into this offseason that they had to get more weapons for Carson Wentz, they had 5 defensive players, only 3 offensive players. Did they do enough in this draft to get weapons for Carson Wentz, John?
No, they're not where they need to be. It starts at running back. Obviously, they did address the wide receiver position dramatically. There's going to be a complete turnover if you think about it. Going back to free agency, you're going to have, of the top 5 receivers, again, 4 are going to be new. And that just speaks to how ineffective the group was last year. But at running back, right now, as I said yesterday on the show, because he's going to retire after this season, I think Darren Sproles is your feature back. And you would prefer to have a real feature back in the NFL. And I don't know if there's one on this roster. And from everything I've gotten around the NFL, the Eagles were hot and heavy on Dalvin Cook in the 2nd round. They weren't able to get him. I think if they were, this team would look a lot better offensively today than it does right now.
John McMullen with us. It does seem, John, like a lot of Eagles fans like this draft, that a lot of the quote-unquote experts out there gave the Eagles positive grades on the way they drafted, and those who do, I know how you feel about the grades, so I won't go too deep into that. But in your mind, is there a bust pick here in this draft of the Eagles crop?
Well, I think Derek Barnett has a chance to be a bust as a first-round pick simply because of where he was taken. I think people are going to expect a double-digit sack guy, and I'm not sure he is that. And if he is, it's probably going to take a while, and maybe a long while, similar to how long it took Brandon Graham. And you know the expectations of this city. And they're going to be sitting there and saying, why can't this guy get to the quarterback? Why isn't he getting 10 sacks? I just don't think he's that kind of player. In fact, I think he's more of a base end than a pass rusher. So from that standpoint, not necessarily that he's going to be a bad player, I think the expectations are going to be out of whack for him. And I think that's always a concern. And as I mentioned with the draft, everyone gets all excited, and then August rolls around. They get on the field with, and this is not just the Eagles. This is every NFL team with the professionals, and it doesn't look nearly as good as it looked in April, and that's just the nature of the NFL. So when you think guys like Hollins or Pumphrey are going to be contributors, the reality is, they are expected to be contributors down the line, not in 2017.
How many of these guys do you think will start or have a significant role? Because when you draft guys, you're hoping that they play and contribute, but that's not always the case. But it seems that a lot of people thought this was a really important draft for Carson Wentz and this Eagles as they kind of pivoted to the Wentz era. Do you see starters on this team from this draft class?
Yeah, I mean, I think Barnett is going to start right away. I just think the expectations are going to be difficult for him. I think Butler is going to start right away, more so out of necessity than anything else. And I certainly think Sidney Jones has a chance to be a starter, certainly a high-level starter in this league, and that might end up being their best pick, and ultimately I do think it will be their best pick. However, it's not going to come to fruition until 2018 because if you think about the timetable, even if he's back by October, remember, that means no OTAs, no training camp. He hasn't been able to do the proper work in the weight room. So the point is he's not going to be ready to play. So I think the Eagles are going to be very, very cautious with him. He might get onto the field at some point. They could redshirt him, but I don't think he's going to be all that effective. Long term, though, I think he's going to be a really good cornerback in this league.
All right, John McMullen, quick NFL news and notes. We talked about the fact that Marcus Smith will have the fifth-year option decline. Big name on that list, too, is Sammy Watkins. Kind of an unbelievable story. They traded up big time to go get him. We saw Doug Whaley, the GM there, get fired the day after the draft earlier this week, and now maybe one of his biggest moves was to trade up and get Sammy Watkins. This guy's been hampered by injuries throughout his career, but big name that could be out on the free agent wire next year.
Yeah, he could be, but remember, just because you don't pick up the fifth-year option doesn't mean you have to move on. In his case, it's all injury-related. It's not performance-related. When he's on the field, he's been effective, and the Bills made a decision. They don't want to guarantee that fifth-year salary, which is a big spike in case of injury. In other words, if he gets hurt this year and is not able to play the next season, the Bills have to pay him upwards of $13 million. So it's really a business decision. And what they said is if he has a big year, they could always franchise him. They could still keep him. So from their standpoint, again, it has more to do with the injuries than the performance. And the fact is it's a guy who just hasn't been able to stay healthy early in his NFL career.
That's really one of the bigger names that was on that list as a couple other teams making moves with that fifth-year option. We see all across the league. And Marcus Smith, the 2014 26th overall pick of the Philadelphia Eagles, he had his option declined. That's another interesting spot. You mentioned Derek Barnett. If Derek Barnett doesn't start, is that a good sign or a bad sign?
It's not a good sign, but it's not a terrible sign because the Eagles have some depth there, especially bringing in Chris Long. They could bring him along slowly and use him as a rotational player if he's not picking up things as quickly as possible.
Like if it brings out the best in Vinny Curry, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and Vinny's going to be in that rotation too. Although I think it's,
he's the forgotten man.
Indictment. Yeah, the clear indictment of him that the fact that they went with a defensive end at 14 overall. I mean, he had his opportunity last year and he didn't perform. And if he has another season like he had last year, he's probably not going to be around for the third year of that contract. So, and it's conceivable, by the way. He doesn't even make the football team this time.
Wow.
If say that Alex McAllister, you talk about a forgotten guy, if he comes back, and we haven't been able to see him yet, if he comes back with 20 or 25 added pounds, the Eagles are going to want to keep him around. They liked him last year as a potential pass rusher. And then you start thinking about numbers. How many are you going to keep at defensive end? Probably 4 are going to play. You're probably going to keep 5. And you also have Steven Means in that mix. So there's some depth at that position. And it's, more likely that Marcus Smith won't be around this year than Vinny Curry, but there's at least the possibility that Vinny won't be here.
Nelson Aguilar and Marcus Smith, the first-round picks just keep coming in here and contributing right away. And
by the way, Mike, real quick, that's why you don't count your chickens in April, because everyone loves Nelson Aguilar too.
Well,
and just because somebody's a first-round pick doesn't mean they're going to be a successful first-round pick.
Right. Well, the feeling has to be it's about time for one of these guys to help you out, right?
Yeah, and I think I do think Derek Barnett will help them out. I just think he will help them out in a different way than people expect. I think he's going to ultimately be a pretty good base left end in the NFL. I don't think he's a weak side pass rusher, and unfortunately, that's what he's being sold as right now.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at FanRag Sports NFL, at JF McMullen on Twitter. Take care, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.